It's my privilege to introduce Lily Wong, who will be reading next. I don't know someone personally. I'm very nervous and careful about making sure I include their publications, so I'm going to read right now. Lily Wong is the author of 4 books. Unfinished, which is this amazing project in which she wrote some of her favorite writers to send her their unfinished stuff, and then she finished it for them. The Evolutionary Revolution, Changing, recipient of a Pen Beyond Margins Award, and Parabola, winner of the 2006 Chiasmus Press Undoing the Novel contest. She edited the anthology 30 Under 30, there's one copy left out front, and served as prose editor for Puerto del Sol and associate editor of Start Your Own Books. She teaches in the MFA program at New Mexico State University and is a contributor to the literary blog HTML Giant. Additionally, after intensive online research, my fiction students culled these notable fun facts. She is motivated by a combination of fear and power. She loves putting little pieces of things next to each other to see what juxtaposition does. She really did try to lay an egg. She teaches a feminist memoirs class. And as a child, she loved gossip. We are so excited and honored that Lily Wong is here. This is really high. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you to Adam and Kim and everyone else for inviting me in Delta Mouth and Louisiana in general. I've eaten a lot of fried food over the last week, and it's delicious. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm reading from a new book. It's called The Book of Martha, and what you need to know, most people when they read from a novel, they read chapter 1. So naturally, I'm reading chapter 3. So I'll give you some backstory. It's a true story, and it takes place in Georgia. And there's a woman who is my height, 5'1". Her name is Martha, and she's 250 pounds, which is give or take like 2 of me plus some. She's in her 3rd marriage. Her first marriage was to a man named Arlen. And it turned out that he left her because he, wanted to go travel the world. And then her 2nd marriage was to a man named Noah, and he left her because he was gay. And she had 2 children, Arlene and Jimmy, and she's about to meet her 3rd husband, Simon. And I mentioned this is real, right? This is a true story. And then the chapter is called Martha and Love. Simon came from nowhere near Georgia at least, which meant nowhere real as far as Martha's concerned. Simon came from a fairy tale, walked into her life like Prince Charming, his hair neatly combed and fingernails clean. He spoke a half-dozen languages, raised in Manhattan with big city flair and pomp, had the accent and everything, but he wasn't nearly the man Arlen was. Or, at least, this was the way Simon portrayed himself. This was the Simon wanted other people to see, and sure enough, it was exactly how Martha came to see him, came to love him, and it was all a fraud. Simon came from nowhere because he came from the same shithole town Martha grew up in. Only he lived on the outskirts of town, right along the eastern curve of the town's invisible boundary. His parents insisted he be homeschooled because those Southerners could never properly teach their son, and they were smart people. Simon didn't make up Manhattan, though. No, he was born in Manhattan, Kansas, that is, where his parents had both been professors previously at Kansas State, one in religious studies, the other at the law school. But they had a love for art and art history and museums of all things before one or the other of them, although rumors circulated that it was both of them, simultaneously, by which I mean together, at once, started taking on affairs with students, young students, in their first years. And these affairs were eventually revealed because affairs can never stay hidden forever, and it was out of morality that they quit their jobs. Sure, because they were moral people, upright citizens, if you will. It's hard to say how Simon's parents landed in Georgia as being one of the most unlikely places they would ever want to go. But they bought a modest house inside the town's limits, but far away from anyone else, kept their boy genius hidden, and took turns commuting an hour and a half to Atlanta, where they both ended up getting jobs, not surprisingly teaching. They didn't make all the fuss they made before. They were quiet, choosing conflicting teaching schedules, never even acknowledging each other at university-wide functions, and maintaining silent affairs with grad students rather than undergrads. And the whole time, they taught Simon. They taught him how great he was, how smart he was, gave him the same education they gave their students. They made no differentiation in syllabus for going algebra or health to emphasize constitutional law or critical theory. Growing up, Simon had no friends, wasn't let out of the house, nor did he want to leave. The outside world promised atrocities and unyielding disdain. The comfort of his books, all composed in strange symbols, told the most beautiful stories. And so it was that Simon grew up, became a man. Simon's parents were determined to reproduce themselves in a more perfect form. Here he was, Simon, this brilliant boy, displaced in the shithole backwards Georgian town. He didn't belong here. He didn't belong anywhere, really. Maybe in the real Manhattan he could have made some friends with some prep school grads. But his parents kept him so well hidden. By the time he was a teenager rebelling, he didn't know what to do. The closest he could get was Holden Caulfield, who was circumstantially and geographically so different they could hardly be similar. So Simon rebelled by reading even more books, by teaching himself the hard sciences, convincing himself he'd learned to be the worst of the worst to his parents, a positivist, who his parents called morons. He considered going to some subpar university just to watch them wince. But instead, he did even worse. He walked out of the house, determined to marry the first woman he saw, which was Martha, of course. And although he found nothing interesting in her, once convinced of something, Simon would never relent. And that's how he punished his parents, his great revenge. Simon could have been anything, done anything. He was a handcrafted prodigy, his boundless potential, and he settled for mediocrity. Not because he wanted to settle, but out of spite, plain and simple. Years later, Simon, still married to Martha, playing the role of father to their children, to her children, tries to remember what made him do it. Marry her. Leave the haven of his secluded home to this life that he couldn't even, this life he could barely even consider a life, and he can't remember. He can't think of a single reason why he should have left, nor a single reason why he shouldn't leave now, this life, his life, start over, use all the things he'd learned, be happy. And this is one sentence. Simon walked out of the house that day, determined to find a wife any wife would do. And it was summer, midday, and hot, and he was wearing a gray-striped Oxford, striped subtle with lavender, and you could only distinguish the particularities of color up close. From afar, it all looked gray, a textured gray, a grainy gray, with creased charcoal slacks, a tweed blazer, also gray. His brown hair uncombed, flattened at certain places from sleep, and he looked wild, his eyes couldn't focus. The sun high and bright, deceptively close, thick, knife very self-consciously sharp to blind him. He thought he was blind, or would have become blind, destined to become blind from this experience, not unlike Oedipus. And what woman would want to marry him then, so disabled, a blind man and a bachelor? It was inevitable. The sun was doing this to him, to torture or to hate, or simply to flex his wiry muscles. Nor could he deny the sun's power. Who was he to compete against a star or a god? Useless, useless. Tears rising not out of fear or sadness, but squinting, his tears involuntary, blinding him further, and cars reeling around him like Broncos or Mustangs, angry, rising on two tire hooves, horns, neighing, rage, buzzing and beeping, glaring. It was a violent world he walked into, leaving the safety of home for what? A wife? And he was hit nearly a half dozen times, at least once, by a bicycle. The woman riding it, the most beautiful you've ever seen, with dark skin and yellow hair, curvy and impossibly good posture, even while riding a bicycle, a cruiser, and almost hitting a pedestrian. That's Simon. The whole time her spine upright as she waved his silky hand, some sorry, and was gone. His inked hand, a badge to show the world what a diligent student he was. The ink caked onto the protruding bump of his middle finger of his right hand, trying to shield the sunlight and dust and cars and noise louder, only increasing in volume and frustration. He was so confused, such dissonant sound coming from every direction, all moving towards him, honing in, but he was determined, despite it all, to find a woman to marry, any woman, though he desired the woman on the bicycle most, wanted her like he'd never wanted any woman before, any real woman, or any old bitch would do to get him out and away from his parents. Not that he was the kind of man to call a woman a bitch, no. That would be disrespectful, no. Simon retracts the word bitch, eager to find a substitute. Lady, woman, bird, gal, old hag. No, that won't do either. That's no less disrespectful than bitch. And amongst all this ruckus, all this to-do, there's Martha, radiant. Or maybe it was just the sun.